I want you to imagine something for a moment. You're in an important job interview, and you want to describe something as very good. The interviewer is waiting for your response, and you open your mouth to speak. But what if I told you that using the word very in that moment could actually make you sound less intelligent and less confident? What if there was a single word that could replace very good and make you sound like a native speaker instantly? Here's the truth that most English learners never discover. Native speakers rarely use the word very in professional or sophisticated conversations. In fact, when I started paying attention to how successful English speakers communicate, I noticed something shocking. They had seemingly unlimited vocabulary at their disposal, while I was stuck repeating the same basic combinations over and over again. But here's what changed everything for me, and it's something that will transform your English in the next 10 minutes. The word very is what I call a lazy word. It's comfortable, it's safe, and it requires zero effort from your brain. When you say very tired, your listener gets the message, sure, but they also get something else. They get the impression that your vocabulary is limited, that you haven't invested in expanding your word power. But what if I told you that instead of very tired, you could say exhausted and immediately sound more sophisticated and precise? Let me share something that completely changed my perspective on English vocabulary. I was watching a TED Talk by an incredibly successful entrepreneur, and I started counting how many times she used the word very. Can you guess how many times she used it in her entire 20-minute presentation? 0. Not once. Instead, she used words like tremendous, exceptional, devastating, and remarkable. But here's the part that made me realize I had been approaching vocabulary all wrong. Every time you choose a more specific word over very plus an adjective, you're not just communicating more effectively, you're actually training your brain to think in more sophisticated patterns. When you say freezing instead of very cold, you're creating stronger neural pathways that will help you in every aspect of your English communication. But there's something even more powerful happening that most people never notice. Let's start with temperature, because this is where most English learners get stuck in the very trap. Instead of very cold, you can say freezing, Arctic, bitter, or frigid. Instead of very hot, try scorching, blazing, sweltering, or boiling. But here's where it gets interesting. Each of these words carries a slightly different emotional weight and creates a different image in your listener's mind. When you say, it's freezing outside, you're not just describing temperature. You're painting a picture, creating an experience, making your listener almost feel the cold. Compare that to, it's very cold outside. Which one makes you want to keep listening? Which one makes the speaker sound more engaging and articulate? But temperature is just the beginning of this vocabulary transformation. Emotions are another area where the very habit can make you sound repetitive and uninteresting. Instead of very happy, you could say ecstatic, thrilled, delighted, or overjoyed. Each of these words carries a different intensity and creates a different impression in your listener mind. When someone says they're ecstatic about a new job, you immediately understand their excitement level in a way that very happy could never convey. But here's something most English teachers never tell you about emotional vocabulary. The words you choose to describe emotions don't just communicate how you feel, they actually influence how intensely you experience those emotions. When you use precise, powerful vocabulary, you're not just speaking better English, you're training your brain to think in more sophisticated patterns. When you say freezing instead of very sad, you might be devastated, heartbroken, or melancholy. Each word opens up new ways of understanding and expressing your inner world. Size and scale offer some of the most dramatic improvements when you eliminate very from your vocabulary. Instead of very big, you can say enormous, massive, gigantic, or colossal. Instead of very small, try tiny, minuscule, microscopic or diminutive. But here's what makes this particularly powerful for English learners who want to sound more professional. In business and academic contexts, precise vocabulary about size and scale makes you sound more credible and authoritative. When you describe a problem as enormous instead of very big, you immediately sound like someone who has a sophisticated understanding of the situation. When you call something minuscule instead of very small, you demonstrate vocabulary mastery that sets you apart from other non-native speakers. But there's even a more strategic reason to master these words. Speed and intensity descriptors are where advanced English speakers really shine. Instead of very fast, you could say rapid, swift, lightning quick, or blazing. Instead of very slow, try sluggish, leisurely, gradual, or deliberate. But here's something fascinating that I discovered about speed-related vocabulary. The word you choose doesn't just describe how fast something is moving. It also conveys your attitude toward that speed. Swift suggests efficiency and grace. Blazing implies excitement and energy. Deliberate suggests careful intention. When you master these subtle differences, you're not just expanding your vocabulary, you're learning to communicate with the precision and nuance of a native speaker. Quality and excellence vocabulary is where you can make the biggest impact in professional situations. Instead of very good, you can say excellent, outstanding, exceptional, or superb. Instead of very bad, try terrible, awful, dreadful, or abysmal. But here's why this matters more than you might think for your career prospects. When you use sophisticated vocabulary to describe quality, you sound like someone who has high standards and can make fine distinctions. An employer hearing you describe a project as exceptional rather than very good immediately gets a different impression of your professionalism and attention to detail. But quality vocabulary goes beyond just sounding professional. Difficulty and challenge vocabulary can transform how you talk about obstacles and achievements. Instead of very hard, you could say challenging, demanding, arduous, or grueling. Instead of very easy, try effortless, simple, straightforward, or trivial. But here's something counterintuitive about difficulty vocabulary that most people miss. How you describe challenges actually influences how you approach them mentally. When you call something demanding instead of very hard, you're framing it as something that requires your skills and attention rather than something that's simply difficult. This subtle shift in language can actually make you more confident and capable when facing obstacles. But challenge vocabulary is just one piece of a larger pattern. Beauty and appearance vocabulary offers some of the most elegant replacements for very. Instead of very beautiful, you can say gorgeous, stunning, magnificent, or breathtaking. Instead of very ugly, try hideous, ghastly, repulsive, or appalling. But here's what makes appearance vocabulary particularly important for English learners. These words don't just describe what something looks like. They convey your emotional response and create an emotional response in your listener. When you describe a sunset as breathtaking instead of very beautiful, you're sharing not just what you saw, but how it made you feel. This kind of emotional vocabulary creates connection and makes your English more engaging and memorable. Intelligence and stupidity vocabulary can dramatically improve how you discuss people and ideas. Instead of very smart, you could say brilliant, ingenious, astute, or sharp. Instead of very stupid, try foolish, absurd, ridiculous, or senseless. But here's why this vocabulary category requires special care and attention. How you talk about intelligence affects not only how others perceive your judgment, but how you think about learning and growth. When you describe an idea as ingenious instead of very smart, you're showing appreciation for creativity and innovation. When you call something absurd instead of very stupid, you're making a more precise critique. This precision in language reflects precision in thinking. Importance and significance vocabulary helps you communicate priorities and values more effectively. Instead of very important, you can say crucial, vital, essential, or critical. Instead of very unimportant, try trivial, insignificant, negligible, or irrelevant. But here's why mastering importance vocabulary is particularly crucial for professional success. In business and academic settings, your ability to communicate what matters most can make or break your effectiveness. When you describe something as crucial instead of very important, you immediately signal that this requires immediate attention and resources. When you dismiss something as trivial instead of very unimportant, you demonstrate strategic thinking and priority setting skills. Certainty and doubt vocabulary allows you to express confidence and doubt with precision. Instead of very sure, you could say confident, certain, convinced, or positive. Instead of very unsure, try doubtful, uncertain, skeptical, or hesitant. But here's something fascinating about certainty vocabulary that most people overlook. The words you use to express confidence actually influence how confident you feel and how confident others perceive you to be. When you say you're convinced rather than very sure, you sound more authoritative and decisive. When you express that you're skeptical rather than very unsure, you sound thoughtful and analytical rather than simply confused. Now, here's the challenge that separates serious English learners from casual ones. I want you to choose 5 very combinations that you use most often in your daily English. Maybe it's very tired, very good, very important, very difficult, and very happy. For the next week, I want you to catch yourself every time you're about to use one of these combinations and force yourself to use the more sophisticated alternative instead. But here's the secret that will make this transformation permanent rather than temporary. Don't just memorize these words as direct replacements. Instead, pay attention to the subtle differences in meaning and emotion that each word carries. Notice how exhausted feels different from very tired, how crucial carries more weight than very important, how ecstatic creates more energy than very happy. The magic happens when you start to feel these differences rather than just knowing them intellectually. When you internalize the emotional and contextual differences between these words, you stop thinking in your native language and translating. You start thinking directly in English with all the precision and nuance that native speakers take for granted. And that's when your English transforms from functional to truly fluent. Remember, every time you choose a precise, powerful word over very plus an adjective, you're not just improving one sentence. You're rewiring your brain to think in more sophisticated patterns, training yourself to communicate with the precision and impact of advanced English speakers, and building the vocabulary confidence that will serve you in every aspect of your English-speaking life. Your English transformation starts with the very next sentence you speak. Will you choose the lazy comfort of very, or will you step into the power and precision of sophisticated vocabulary? The choice is yours, and it will make all the difference.